All right, welcome everybody. I am very delighted to be with 100 of participants all over the world today as we open the P4G SEOUL Summit Partnering for Green Growth and Global Goals 2030 official side event, organized, of course, by the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, or AFoCO, from the Republic of Korea. I am Tina Marasigan, a journalist and your friendly nature lover from the Philippines, and I will join you as we discover and share this event, which also highlights a very important launch as we see and probe on the forest-based solution, Green Path to Building Back Better. The year 2020 has brought us unprecedented hurdles that have changed the future from all fronts. And amidst today's crisis, AFoCO have taken this opportunity to use virtual platforms in continuing Korea's commitment towards a low carbon future through nature-based approaches. All right. And this event also highlights the soft launch of the Landscape Partnership Asia program with its founding partners, AFoCO, Center for International Forestry Research, and World Agroforestry. Together, that's CIFOR-ICRAF and Global EverGreening Alliance, or GIA. And today, AFoCO with its partners will specifically explore the role of forests in contributing to the global net zero emission ambition through a panel discussion, and will provide an opportunity for state and private sector leaders to better understand the mitigation potential of the global forest and promote investments in the forest sector. I am very excited for all of our participants all over the world, and we are also graced with the presence of our panelists and speakers who are also leaders, experts, and change makers. I am sure that all of our participants will have a highly productive learning experience today, and we encourage everyone to send in their thoughts and questions anytime via Q&A chat box. Our technical team will collate your queries and will be answered by our speakers later on. And this virtual event will not only unfold presentations and projects on green transformation, but more importantly, it fosters collaboration through shared advocacies and expertise that will surely lead to great and long-term impact in the environment. And this is why it is my pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization to officially open this great collaboration. None other than Director Ricardo Calderon.
Excellencies, distinguished panelists, guests and participants, good day everyone. This year's theme of the P4G Summit, Partnership for Green Growth and Global Goals, Inclusive Green Recovery Towards Carbon Neutrality, is a very challenging task for world leaders, business community, development partners, multilateral organizations, civil society and non-governmental organizations, and the financial institutions all over the globe. To keep the global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade at pre-industrial levels and pursue efforts to stay within the 1.5 degrees centigrade under the Paris Agreement, which scientists say is necessary to prevent worse impact of climate change and sustain economic development, is a challenging task for all countries and territories. Hence, the need for governments to strengthen their sectoral mitigation and adaptation ambitions, capture synergies, including co-benefits among major sectors, and accelerate progress on the Sustainable Development Agenda. The world needs to reach the net zero emissions by removing and storing more carbon dioxide than we put in the atmosphere, but demands new technology and innovations, new industrial processes, new way of living for people, and serious financial investments. In 2019, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services noted that nature-based solutions are estimated to provide 37% of climate change mitigation needed to meet the goal of keeping climate warming below 2 degrees centigrade with co-benefits to biodiversity. Restoring trees in the forest and landscape through reforestation, restocking and rehabilitation of degraded forests, agroforestry, and preventing deforestation is the single largest and cost-effective opportunity for carbon removal and storage. But this needs concerted efforts from all sectors, a clearly defined enabling policies and programs from governments, fiscal investments and support from financial institutions, private sector participation and investments, institutional and capacity building from development partners, multilateral organizations, and civil society organizations. Hopefully, our side event today could overcome these barriers and set the tone for meaningful partnership and broader cooperation for forest-based solution in order to build back better towards green recovery and carbon neutrality. Good day, and I wish you all productive discussion. Kamsahamnida, mabuhay.
Kamsahamnida, maraming salamat. Thank you very much, Director Calderon. We are truly grateful for AFoCO's efforts in mounting this event despite the challenges brought about by the pandemic. And I personally hope that by all means, we continue to have learning sessions and collaborations like this to explore the potential and strength of the forest sector in addressing the pressing issues of climate change and to further spark a great interest and inspiration in getting things done globally. We shall hear the message of the President and Chairperson of GGGI and the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon.
Hello, and congratulations to the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, AFoCO, for organizing this side event ahead of the P4G summit. Through this event, I hope AFoCO continues to make significant contributions to the broader global goals to fight the climate crisis. With the exciting technological advances in renewable and alternate energy sources, it is sometimes easy to forget or underestimate the importance of forestry and sustainable land use. While exciting technological advances can help us decrease our dependence on fossil fuels and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, it is our forests that absorb our CO2 gases and provide the clean air, wildlife habitats, and so much more. Therefore, on behalf of the Global Green Growth Institute, I am very pleased to congratulate AFoCO for organizing this event, as well as for obtaining observer status to the United Nations General Assembly late last year. My best wishes for continued success in helping countries achieve their commitments to the Paris Climate Agreement and attain the Sustainable Development Goals. Once again, my warm congratulations and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, sharing this initiative and inspiration across the United Nations. And of course, your blessing reflects a solid partnership, solid desire to make our environment, our world, a better place, a greener one for future generations. And as we speak greens, of course, we cannot skip the inspiration which Indonesia gives as the country covers a significant 94 million hectares or 5% of the world's tropical forest. Let's hear the message behind this great scene. With us is His Excellency, Mr. Umar Hadi, the Ambassador of Indonesia to the Republic of Korea.
In the next few days and in the coming months, two important climate change talks, the 2021 P4G SEOUL Summit and the Glasgow's United Nations Climate Change Conference will be taking place. These summits are expected to solidify global commitment in addressing climate change and sustainable development challenges. These summits are critical as the world expects countries to raise their ambition towards carbon neutrality. We do not have much time as climate crisis is imminent. Nonetheless, we cannot tackle climate crisis alone. All hands should be on deck. We must strengthen our partnership through global platforms, including through AFoCO. Forest protection is indeed an inevitable part of climate resilience. In its G20 presidency in 2022, next year, Indonesia will prioritize enhancing cooperation in climate change and sustainable development. The future of humankind is on our shoulders. Climate conferences, climate summits are vital. But the most important thing is we must walk the talk. I am confident that this AFoCO's event on forest-based solution, a green path to building back better, will concretely lead us to that direction. Congratulations, and I wish you a successful event. Thank you very much.
The ambition towards carbon neutrality is indeed achievable through global efforts, and I agree with Mr. Hadi that we should walk the talk. Whatever we learn from this summit should lead us to that great ambition. And simultaneous to these efforts towards the green transformation is the initiatives of Vietnam as they continue the fast-paced growth of their economy. Let me present you the ambassador of Vietnam to the Republic of Korea, His Excellency Mr. Nguyen Vu Tung.
Honorable Mr. Ricardo Calderon, Executive Director of AFoCO, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor to deliver the welcome remarks for the Forest-Based Solution, the Green Path to Building Back Better conference organized by the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, AFoCO, on the sideline of the second Partnering for Green Growth and the Global Goals 2030 P4G Summit in Seoul, Korea. As we all can see, the world enters the 21st century with a series of challenges posed by the climate change. Confronted by these challenges, each and every country should take responsibility for minimizing the damages from natural disasters, fighting against widespread deforestation and timber overexploitation, and protecting the forest, our green lungs, therefore, is of great importance. With the theme Forest-Based Solution, a Green Path to Building Back Better, I hope our conference will join hands in developing significant initiatives and solutions toward the most effective forestation, forest protection and management, thus contributing to the green recovery theme of the P4G Seoul Summit today. I'd like to reiterate that Vietnamese partners, including the Vietnamese government and the Vietnam Embassy in Korea, would continue to act side by side with AFoCO and other international partners in this important endeavor. I'd like to end my remarks here with my wish for great success of this event. And thank you very much for your attention.
All right, it must be said that each of the message from our dear leaders doesn't only engage their respective country or organization, but each of the individuals in the world who are working tirelessly behind scenes for the shared mission of bringing a healthier environment for everyone. So, as we continue the work ahead, we are now about to witness another common thread within our shared advocacies for the environment through the Landscape Partnership Asia, or LPA. It is my honor to turn over the virtual floor to the Vice Executive Director of AFoCO, Mr. Jin Sunpil, for us to know more about this synergy.
Thank you, Tina. Esteemed colleagues, honored guests, distinguished partners, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to inform you of an initiative that is worth remembering on the years and decades to come, which is consistent to the goals and objectives of the P4G. With emphasis on the enhancement of our environment, people, and our respective governments, and toward contributing to the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. I feel honored today to talk about one of the most motivating efforts on land restoration in Asia, that is the Landscape Partnership for Asia, or simply LPA. This partnership was born through the collaboration of its founding partners, namely the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, AFoCO, the Center for International Forestry Research, and the World Agroforestry Center, CIFOR-ICRAF, and the Global EverGreening Alliance, GGGI. This soft launch is considered to kickstart the series of milestones and workshops towards the grand launch of the LPA slated in the coming World Forestry Congress in 2022. Allow me to introduce the highlights of activities that you will witness in the next 20 minutes. The primary introduction of the LPA will be done through a video presentation. Thereafter, there will be a segment for high-spirited discourses on the challenges and opportunities that the LPA is facing through an exchange of perspectives from distinguished speakers from CIFOR-ICRAF and the Global EverGreening Alliance. And finally, to officially conclude the soft launching, Mr. Chris Armitage, the CEO of the Global EverGreening Alliance, will convey his closing message. With our unified effort and undaunted ambition to restore at least 10 million hectares of degraded forests and agricultural land in dry land and drought-prone areas, along with our new and prospective government, technical and donor partners, I'm very certain that LPA will be remembered as a prime contributor to our quest for forest and land restoration in Asia. Thank you very much, and please get ready for the LPA video presentation.
please join us, and together we will green up to cool down the planet.
Our partnership is a meaningful program that will support countries across Asia to reach this important goal.
Drylands are very important both for delivering global ecosystem services, but also for sustaining the livelihood of a local population.
We can show that restoration will produce exceptional, sustainable, economic, social and ecological benefits.
This undertaking is ambitious, necessary, and it is achievable. And building on the shared experience and capacity of the Alliance and our partners, AFoCO and CIFOR-ICRAF, we know we can exceed all expectations in the years ahead.
Good morning, Dr. Nasi, Director General from CIFOR-ICRAF. As we've seen in the previous video, the LPA is by far the most ambitious partnership for dryland restoration in Asia. But at the moment, the partnership focuses only on 13 countries. And Dr. Nasi, my question to you is, how do you think LPA can catalyze an Asia-wide dryland restoration agenda with more, if not all countries, pledging their targets?
Thanks. I think that in Asia we are facing several problems. I mean, the two most prominent problems that we can see in the restoration area is overall in the globe, people have a tendency to overlook drylands. So there is a lot of focus on the Amazon, there is a lot of focus on the Congo Basin rainforest. There is a lot of focus on peatlands, but you hear much less about dryland. And Asia has a large part of dryland. I mean, that's sort of either the cold dryland in Mongolia or in Central Asia, or some tropical dryland in East Indonesia. So overlooked important ecosystem that have been important for biodiversity and for carbon storage and climate change. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is that there is no single organization in Asia that look at this issue. And as a result, I mean, it's sort of, if you compare the commitment, the pledge from Asian country in a global restoration challenge, like the Bond Challenge, they're almost inexistent. So we need to create this catalytic effect, and that's the hope of the LPA, is that we will have a catalytic effect, and that by showing initial success in restoration, we will bring other people to join us and hopefully restore much more than the initial target, which is quite ambitious, but 10 million is a drop in the dryland area.
Yeah, if we look at those targets, you already mentioned them. The LPA ambition restore target is 10 million hectares of dryland and drought-prone areas in 10 years. Which is only a fraction of the areas needing restoration. And to achieve those targets, large funding and political commitment is required. And what is your message, Dr. Robert Nasi, to the donor community and the concerned governments for this?
I mean, the first message is that one has to start somewhere. So I think that having put this target of 10 million hectares, it's already quite ambitious. And clearly, the LPA itself, I mean, CIFOR-ICRAF, the EverGreening Alliance, or AFoCO will not be that by themselves. I mean, we will need partners, we will need commitment, we need donors.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think what we should first work in the sort of, we need to have the sort of the political commitment. We need also to have strong interaction with the people on the ground, because fundamentally, if we don't remove the reason for which the land were degraded initially, and by people acting on their land, then there is very little chance that any restoration activity will happen. So when we have this enabling environment in place, and in some country it is in place, in other country, that's where LPA can help in terms of facilitating synergies and exchange. Then when you have the commitment, the political commitment, and you have the adoption by the local population, then you can go to the donor, and not only the public, but also private investor, and saying, okay, ladies and gentlemen, there is an opportunity here for you to do good, and at the same time, I mean, a sort of to make improve the livelihood of local people, produce goods and services, and have a profitable green business. Restoration should be an economic activity. I mean, there is no way that restoration will work only by being funded by public money and trying to produce ecosystem services. And if there is nothing for the people on the ground, I mean, they won't do it. So, and I think that's something that the LPA can catalyze, and hopefully people will follow.
Yes, definitely. And then to conclude, can you elaborate a little bit more on LPA? What does this partnership have to be confident about achieving its ambition?
Well, I think first is the commitment and the energy of the people. I mean, that's not, I'm sure that you will be even more convinced after hearing the keynote by Denise. And so we are convinced that we have to do that. We are also remaining optimistic in spite of everything happening, because you have to believe in you can make a change. And then this is a group of very complementary with two international research organizations, with an international NGO, with a country-based organization, an international intergovernmental organization. So that brings a very different set of skills and capacity that should help us ideally to attract other people, because I don't think that it's a closed club or a member restricted club. I mean, a sort of the more people we can convince to join the LPA with complementary skill, the more chances we will have to achieve our goals.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
insights, Dr. Robert Nasi from CIFOR. Now I would like to give the floor to the CEO of the Global EverGreening Alliance, Chris Armitage, to further call for LPA support and to draw some conclusions on the soft launching.
Good morning, everyone. While I only have a few minutes to speak, I'd like to take a moment to begin with to thank Tina Marasigan for doing such a wonderful job as our MC today. And of course, Mr. Calderon, Mr. Sunpil, and Dr. Nasi for their invaluable insights. And so many staff from AFoCO, CIFOR-ICRAF, and the Global EverGreening Alliance for their tireless efforts over the recent months and recent years in supporting the Landscape Partnership Asia and in making our side event at P4G possible today. The Landscape Partnership Asia has been a long time in the making, but I think I can speak for all of the founding member organizations when I say that we're extremely excited to be part of today's launch. The Landscape Partnership Asia seeks to address environmental challenges that affect the lives of tens of millions of people living in rural communities across Asia. It will also contribute significantly to the achievement of global targets, including those of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and the Sustainable Development Goals. While few land restoration initiatives focus on restoring drylands, it's estimated that more than 1.4 billion people live in the drylands of Asia. These communities are some of the most vulnerable to the impacts of land degradation and to climate change across the region. The Landscape Partnership Asia brings together diverse stakeholders, including the governments of participating countries, multilateral and institutional donors, corporate investors, leading technical and research institutions, NGOs, project developers, value chain and market actors, and of course local farming and forest dependent communities to address this challenge in a sustainable way and at the landscape level. Over the next 10 years, the Landscape Partnership Asia will restore degraded ecosystems and dry forests. It will increase the productivity, the reliability and resilience of agricultural systems to the impacts of increasingly severe weather events and a changing climate. And it will enhance the livelihoods of millions of vulnerable families and support broad green economic growth across the region. But we know from experience that this enormous effort can only hope to succeed with the support and commitment of all stakeholders. So I'd like to appeal to everyone. Join us, pledge your support, and be part of what could be the greatest positive transformation in Asia in our lifetimes. Be part of the Landscape Partnership Asia, and together we will restore the drylands of Asia. For more information on the Landscape Partnership Asia and how you can get involved, please visit our website at landscapepartnershipasia.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chris Armitage. Commitment of the stakeholders will definitely be the fuel of this new partnership, and the implementation of performance-based investments through LPA that will mitigate the climate crisis, build the resilience of forests, rangelands, and agricultural landscapes, and which will also target to improve livelihoods, scales new heights in supporting global efforts in striking a healthy balance between energy, food, carbon, and biodiversity. And as the green path is the central to this agenda, it is only fitting that we spotlight forest-based solutions. With us today is systems agronomist and research leader whose career has been focused on the development of small-scale farming system tropics. He is currently the Drylands Ambassador for the UN Convention to Combat Desertification and Distinguished Senior Research Fellow at the World Agroforestry Center, or ICRAF, Nairobi. He is also the chair of the board of the Global EverGreening Alliance, who is currently leading an effort on the perennialization of agriculture in the 21st century, building more productive and environmentally sound farming systems through a global partnership to create an evergreen culture, or evergreen agriculture. Okay, without further ado, let's give the virtual floor to Dr. Garrity.
Thank you, Tina, and good day, everyone. Well, ladies and gentlemen, forests are going to play an enormous role in saving humanity from the climate disaster. Indeed, they already are critical for cooling the planet, but that role is going to increase hugely in the coming decades, and it must. Let me explain why this is so, and why we must focus on vastly accelerating forest-based solutions to provide an evergreen path to building back better. Here's a picture of the Earth's current predicament and what humanity has got to do to avoid a global warming catastrophe. Greenhouse gas emissions, mainly due to fossil fuels, are still increasing. This makes the path to a drastic emissions reduction by 2050 an extremely difficult path to follow, yet it has to be done. The graph shows the path of emissions decline that is necessary, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in order to reach a global peak temperature increase of between 1.5 and 2 degrees. Anything above that will be so terrible as to be almost inconceivable. Now let's take a look at the role of our forests in soaking up excess carbon. Currently, the world's forests and oceans each absorb about 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year, totaling over 20 billion tons of emissions reductions. That is shown by the line at the bottom of this graph. Now, this is over half of the CO2 emissions that humans are putting into the atmosphere, being absorbed back down to Earth every year. Few people realize what an enormous positive role that forests already play in reducing the severity of global warming. And if it weren't for the forests, then carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere would be much, much higher than they already are. And global temperature would have been much more increased than the 1.1 degrees that they have to date. Thank God for our forests. And you'll see from the graph that even if gross human emissions do drop by 50 to 60% by mid-century, the Earth can still reach zero net emissions by then because of the CO2 absorption by the forests and the oceans. But the IPCC warns that we must do much better than this. We must begin to draw down enormous quantities of CO2 from the atmosphere by mid-century, because we will still overshoot the 1.5 degree temperature level if we don't. How can we do that? Well, we all need to support a truly ambitious goal, a goal to evergreen the Earth and to be drawing down much greater quantities of CO2 than we are now. The Evergreening the Earth campaign is a global effort to achieve the goal of drawing down an additional 20 billion tons of CO2 per year by massive success in land restoration and reforestation. The campaign is spearheaded by the Global Evergreening Alliance. This coalition of over 50 organizations includes virtually all of the world's major conservation and development NGOs and supporting research organizations like CIFOR and ICRAF, working in tandem with governments and UN agencies and programs. Its mission is to join forces to achieve the scale of landscape restoration needed to achieve a 20 billion ton drawdown goal. And here is what happens when we succeed. Note the blue zone below the line. It tracks the accelerated absorption of CO2 as we begin to ramp up the global forest and landscape restoration effort. You'll see that by 2050, more CO2 is being absorbed than is being emitted on planet Earth. And the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere will, by then, mercifully be declining. This accelerated drawdown, spearheaded by stopping deforestation and by massive restoration of degraded forest landscapes, will cap the global rise in temperature to about 1.5 degrees. Global temperatures will then begin to decline after mid-century, and the worst of the climate emergency will be behind us. How, you ask, will it ever be possible to do this? How can we restore so much forest and degraded land during the next 30 years? Well, the breaking news from just a few days ago illustrates the possibilities. The Guardian newspaper has reported that over the past 20 years, an area of forest the size of France has been regenerated around the world. This is almost 60 million hectares of restored forests during the past 2 decades. The global impact of this restoration process has been immense. 22 billion additional trees regenerated and 5.9 billion tons of carbon dioxide captured. Now, this is a start, and it shows that massive forest regeneration is actually happening already, and that more is possible. But the scale of restoration in the future must be much, much greater. Here is a map of where some of the greatest concentration of forest restoration has already occurred in Asia and in Europe. Note the many zones of dark purple and bright green. These are the places where great areas of forest have been restored in the past 2 decades. The Landscape Partnership Asia, which we are soft launching today, spearheaded by AFoCO, CIFOR-ICRAF, and the Global EverGreening Alliance, the sponsors of this event, we aim to ramp up and accelerate the restoration process across each of our 13 member countries in Asia. For example, Mongolia is a real inspiration. Already, satellite analysis has shown that 1.24 million hectares of forest have been regenerated recently in Mongolia, which has spurred the Mongolian government onward to now take action to restore tens of millions of more hectares of degraded land during the coming decade with the support of the Global Environment Facility. And there are so many vast areas of the world where this kind of commitment can make a difference. Here is a map of the extent of the world's degraded lands, where tree cover can be greatly increased. The potential for reversing this degradation of forest lands and agriculture is simply enormous, and it is critically important for the Earth's future. Indeed, recent analyses have shown that the world has room to comfortably accommodate at least 1 trillion additional trees without sacrificing agricultural production. The 22 billion trees that have been restored so far during the past 20 years is only 2% of this potential. There is a lot of room for restoration to grow and spread to every community in every corner of the globe. Here is what the EverGreening the Earth campaign has pledged to do during the next 30 years. To restore tree cover on 575 million hectares of degraded forest lands, and thereby capture an additional 8.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year from the atmosphere. And this is only about 1/3 of the treeless, degraded forest land that exists in the world, which is over 1.7 billion hectares. Now, much of this land can be restored by natural regeneration or by deploying assisted natural regeneration, a low-cost alternative to planting trees. Indeed, regeneration is much cheaper than tree planting, and it brings with it major advantages in biodiversity conservation, and it enhances many other environmental and production services for people and for the land. Ethiopia is an example of this. This is a country that has committed itself to restoring over 15 million hectares of degraded watershed areas by 2050. And it is already well along the way to achieving its national goal by deploying what is known as watershed closures. Highly degraded watersheds are allowed to rest from intensive human and livestock pressure, rapidly regenerating a forest that provides rich, greater benefits to local populations. Similarly, we have assisted natural regeneration to enable communities in many other countries to have restoration success, such as this formerly degraded watershed on the island of Bohol in the Philippines. But to succeed in attaining our EverGreening goal, ladies and gentlemen, We must also focus our restoration efforts on the degraded farmlands and rangelands of the world. We must dramatically increase tree cover on agricultural lands through agroforestry. Fortunately, this is already happening. We now know that the farmlands of the world have more than 10% tree cover, and that the percentage is increasing almost everywhere, particularly in the tropics. Tree cover on farmlands in India and China and Brazil is all increasing at a rapid clip, often by combining tree crops and annual crops in agroforestry systems like this. And another startling example has occurred in Africa, where farmer-managed natural regeneration of trees has regenerated a tree cover on farmlands in the dry zones that now covers more than 21 million hectares and is growing rapidly. Farmer-managed natural regeneration is now seen by the World Bank and many others as a foundational practice for resilient dryland agriculture. And we can further accelerate this process. Take the case of Southeast Asia. Tree cover on farmlands is increasing particularly fast in this region, in virtually all of the countries in Southeast Asia, as is shown by the blue and purple areas on this map. Indeed, in the extensive purple areas in the Philippines and Indonesia, tree cover on agricultural land has now exceeded 30% of the farmlands. The Global EverGreening Alliance and the campaign has focused like a laser on all the ways that forest and landscape restoration can be accelerated around the world. And it is collaborating as a partner with the UN Decade for Ecosystems Restoration and the World Economic Forum's 1 Trillion Trees program. Interest in supporting restoration has grown exponentially during the past year. Indeed, there is a race to restore now falling into place on a global basis. Already, as we know, the race to zero has gained enormous momentum, whereby scores of governments and thousands of corporations have committed formally to zero emissions by 2050. Now, these entities will be purchasing carbon credits to meet their emissions gap on the road to zero emissions. There's an opportunity to generate billions of dollars for forest and landscape restoration through this process. And a race to restore could set up a registry to formally recognize these commitments and investments, to build momentum and to track the progress. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, we can build back better by building back greener, by accelerating the restoration efforts of the green up to cool down our planet. We need all hands on deck, investors, corporations, governments, and civil society, the push of an aroused global citizenry. We can only do it if we all pull together. And indeed, we actually must do it. Onwards, colleagues, and back to you, Tina.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dennis Garrity. I have one question for you, though, before I let you go and before we move forward to our panel discussion. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yes, Dr. Garrity, considering the impact and limitations of the global pandemic in the economic capacity of the countries, world, specifically here in Asia, how do we strengthen low-cost natural regeneration of trees in the local communities in the tropics? What was the strategy in doing so, specifically with what we've seen in Bohol, Philippines?
Well, indeed, governments and communities and businesses are reeling from the effects of the pandemic today, but we are beginning to see the pandemic slip behind us with the new efforts of successful vaccination, etc. And in many countries, the economies are building back and booming as a post-pandemic. And so I'm confident that although this has been a major setback for people and livelihoods and government budgets, that there will be ever more determination to build back better and to build back greener. And I believe that the pandemic will serve as a wake-up call for the world to get on with what it needs to do, not only to solve our common pandemic threat, but to solve the greatest crisis that the world faces in the coming years, which is the climate emergency. I'm confident we'll do it.
I'm with you, sharing that confidence, sir, because we will be certainly working hand in hand in this. Thank you very much for your guidance today and for your inspiration, Dr. Garrity. And we are now moving forward to the presentations and how we can optimize the roles of forests in bringing net zero emission ambition. May I ask Dr. Garrity to please turn off the sharing of your slides to give the floor to our speakers today, because we have 4 panel members waiting for the discussion here in our event, and we encourage everyone, all of our participants, please, to participate in the exchange of ideas by typing in your comments and questions via Q&A chat box. Let's make our conversation, our learning session active this morning. And don't forget to include your name and affiliation with your queries as you type it in. And without further ado, let me introduce the first panel member, who is the Director General of Forest Policy Bureau, Korea Forest Service, Ms. Mira.
Thank you, Ms. Tina. Good afternoon. I hope all of you joining us today are safe and healthy. I'm Mira from the Korea Forest Service. I'm pleased to welcome you to Seoul virtually. I'm honored to share the Korea Forest strategy for 2050 carbon neutrality society. This January, we issued the first draft. Since then, we have opened it to the public to gather opinions. By September, we will confirm the final version. In October 2020, the Korea government announced the Declaration of Carbon Neutrality 2050. Among the goals, forest carbon sink is a key priority. The forestry was also initially included in Korea's nationally determined contribution NDC 2030 to increase forest carbon sink. Hence, we came up with 5 key elements to tackle the increased carbon sink and 7 major strategies to achieve them. To understand our strategy, I want to briefly introduce to you the distinct characteristics of Korean forestry. Now, 63% of the Korea is under forest cover. This number, 63%, is a successful fruit from decades of forest rehabilitation. After the Korean War, we started with Mindongsan, meaning bare mountain, as you can see in the picture here. Successful afforestation turned the devastated trees into 2 million hectares of forest. Of course, the afforestation includes the artificial forest and coppice forest. The forest stock has also continued to increase. Since 1970, the growing stock per hectare increased 16 times, 1,600% by 2019. The Korea Forest Service now focuses on the public benefits of forests. Public benefits are non-economical benefits like carbon sink, soil erosion prevention, watershed enhancement, forest healing, biodiversity conservation, etc. The public benefits of the forest have increased since 1990 and were estimated to be around 221 trillion won, equivalent to approximately 195 billion US dollars in 2018. The reforestation was very successful. Yet, the Korean forest has three challenges. First, the tree age class bias and aging. Intensive rehabilitation happened from 1973 to 1987 for 15 years. These trees are now around 30 to 40 years old. The decreasing greenhouse gas sink since 2009 reflects the aging tree status. Second, forest fires are growing in scale and frequency. The wildfires now occur year-round due to the abnormal climates. In addition, by unexpected desiccation and heavy rain, there has been increased reports of pests and landslides. Third, species vulnerable to climate change, like the alpine conifers, are decreasing. Around 30% are specifically Apis koreana, Korean fir, well-known Christmas tree. Hence, we propose the best nature-based solution for carbon neutrality based on Korean forest, three challenges, and contribute to carbon neutrality. The goal is to plant 3 billion trees for 3 decades and remove 34 million tons of CO2 by 2050. We have 4 implementation strategies to achieve our goal. First, we will diagnose the current carbon removal capacity of our forest and improve it. Korea forest is categorized into the economic forest and public forest by their function. We plan to focus on economic forest to improve carbon removal. Specifically, we will improve the biostage class distribution, develop climate change resilient tree species. Second, we will secure new forest carbon sinks. We will expand the urban forest and actively use underutilized lands. We support various entities, including local governments, industries, and NGOs, to participate in the process. Externally, we aim to increase investment in North Korea's forest rehabilitation and red frost activities with bilateral cooperation. Third, we will revitalize the wood and forest biomass industry. We aim to expand the demand for the harvested forest. Particularly, the forest biomass industry has shown promising achievements in wildfire prevention as a carbon neutral source to substitute fossil fuels. Fourth, we will conserve and restore forest carbon sinks to restore the forest ecosystem diversity. We will increase protected forest areas and expand the conservation of our native plants inside and outside Korea. This diagram depicts our 2050 carbon neutrality strategy in one glance. Here is a conceptual diagram of a well-balanced forest management cycle. The cycle involves 3 steps: harvesting the economic forest, which is 1/3 of total forest; planting back trees, especially climate resilient or economic species; tending to grow into the economic forest again. The core value of the process is harmonically realize the ecological, economic, and social benefits of our forest, covering 63% of the Korean peninsula. The government plans to utilize the harvest trees that have reached the forest yield age. The utilization involves diverse benefits to various sectors. Timber will be used as building materials, while byproducts will be used as biomass to produce heat and electricity for households and power generation. Please refer to the following for detailed implementation strategy. As I mentioned in the beginning, we will finalize the strategy by this September. We are excited to collect the opinions of various stakeholders and enhance our strategies. Korean forest went through successful afforestation. Now we are starting the forest management cycle to implement the fruits of the afforestation. I hope the world would realize forestry and trees as the best nature-friendly solution to bring a carbon-neutral society. I think all the panel members feel the same way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee Mira. Allow me to share a question raised earlier for this presentation. And the question is, what are the priorities of Korean government to carbon neutrality by the year 2050? And what kind of cooperation and support is required to achieve this? Now, friends, it is unfortunate that the Director General, or Ms. Lee Mira, could not join us today. Nevertheless, she has this answer for the said question.
Our priority is citizen involvement. How we achieve the carbon neutrality goal is important, and it must be with the public. We know the importance of citizen involvement from 1970s. The dramatic forest rehabilitation could only happen with the participation of the entire nation. In the 70s, the government decided to promote green business to improve poverty, reduce natural disasters. Children, parents, elderly were all encouraged to plant trees. As a result, the afforestation solved landslides, fuel scarcity, and poverty. So we promote public participation in forestry. I'm pretty confident the focus group dialogue of people from various backgrounds, from private forest owners and managers, academia, NGOs, biomass and timber industry members will improve holistic decision making. Thank you for all listening to Korea's story of dramatic afforestation and our promise to keep 2050 carbon neutrality. But this is not just our story. We are gathered here to dream together. Forestry is beyond Korea. I believe forestry guides the way we sustain our life. The way we coexist with nature and the way we, our generation, and the future generation can enjoy life. Now I invite you to join us as sustainable living is our global agenda. We are all in this together. Thank you.
A sustainable living is indeed a strong way of life. I am looking forward to see generations for a common goal towards 2050. And indeed, this is beyond Korea. This is a global effort. Thank you very much for your guidance, for guiding us through, Director General Lee Mira. And for the participants, please let us know your key takeaway from the presentation of Ms. Lee Mira by typing it in the Q&A chat box. And we shall include your insights together with your questions in the panel discussion or open forum later on. And we have now our second panel member to discuss public-private partnership in forest sector climate actions. We shall also know more about the engagement of local communities and smallholders in REDD+, which could contribute to net zero carbon emissions. Friends, let's welcome the chair of Indonesia Business Links, or IBL, Board of Patron, Mr. Heru Prasetyo.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. It was so encouraging, so positive to listen to the speeches before. But let me share a little bit my perspective into this from the business side. The Sustainable Development Goals targeted for 2030 and the COP21 Paris Agreement were actually achieved long after we feel the pain of climate change. 72, we are already talking about this unsustainable development that we are facing, 1972, and only in COP21, 21 years after UNFCCC was established, that we get the Paris Agreement. No, it's not something that we are slow or what, but this is very hard. Changing business as usual which is to deeply entrench. It's very, very difficult. Now, the climate change effect today is so hard that we are now forced to do the net zero for 2050. Not all countries are providing that. Not all countries are making that commitment. But regardless whether you are making commitment or not, the pressure, encouragement, incentive, and disincentive, both through political and economical means, cannot be lessened to any of the countries. On carbon neutrality also, we see that Indonesia for this time is something that we can be a little bit proud about. Because you know that, as Paul Polman mentioned, if you want to build back greener, take a leaf out of Indonesia's book today. The last 4 years, Indonesia saw the decrease in deforestation significantly. And the only one among all the biggest tropical forests in the world. And this is something that is very important, and this is something that is making us very optimistic about. But on my experience being the co-chair of the International Red Plus Partnership in the past, this kind of situation is fragile. This kind of conditions of a good performance is most of, if not all, of all forested country is actually fragile. It has the content of the reliable maps. If you don't have sufficient relevant data, if your management mechanism is not good, if there is no smart PPP collaboration policies, and there is no right directed paradigm, as well as the amount of timing of available resources, besides political dynamics and economic situation on the ground, is all very challenging. And you can say that maybe the next 4 years is not as good. So what happened? Why can we get into this position? It's not something that is overnight coming. We have set this up from 2012 when we are talking about Red Plus, and where we are saying that we need to shift the exploitation of the forest mindset into one that is more conservation in nature. And we created the new national maps. We do data integration, robust forest fire monitoring system, moratorium of new licenses since 2011, recognition and protection of indigenous people's rights, and establishment of safeguard measures. In 2015, the government of Indonesia made a bold move, integrating the Ministry of Environment with Ministry of Forestry. That was a bold political move, but because of that, we have the results today. Continues doing the strategy, and we have the results today. It takes 5 years, 6 years to get to where we are today. It's not overnight. Now, that is something that we are talking about with the initiative of the government, helped by the international community, as well as in consultation with the private sector. In consultation, not much of getting them fully involved in that. One of the problems that we are facing so far is basically because our economy is lopsided. We are not putting externalities on nature, human and social capital into the equation. So the discussion between the government and the private sector is always not complete because both sides are not looking into the externalities as part of the cost. Look at this. This is how the externalities sabotage sustainability. A study in 2013 by True Cost shows the biggest problem here in terms of cattle ranching and farming in South America, whereby your revenue, the benefit of doing things, is actually 16.6 billion US, while the natural capital cost is 353.8 billion US, which means that the impact ratio, we gained 16.6, we lost 353.8. The same thing with the wheat farming in Southern Asia, whereby you're talking about gaining 31.8 and losing 266.6. The impact ratio of 8.4 is actually killing the planet. Same thing in terms of the forests, etc. So that situation has not been openly agreed and discussed between the stakeholders because of various reasons, because of our economic equations as well as key performance indicator is based on wealth, is built on welfare, built on scarcity, and built on growth, but not in terms of the sustainability. Two types of private companies in Indonesia and many other places, I believe, has faced different challenges. In the land use exploiting companies, between 2001 and 2050, commodity production was the dominant driver of deforestation globally. And in Southeast Asia, the proportion is even higher, it's 61%. That's significant numbers. In recent years, we have seen more companies committing to sustainable commodity commitments across commodity and across supply chain level. One recent research that looks into 865 companies with forest risk exposure reveals that only 484 companies have declared commitment, and out of which only 72 companies specify zero deforestation commitments, which means that making commitment is hard, but doing the commitment is even harder. Again, because of the matrix that is talking about what the private company is aiming for, it's not putting externalities inherently. That becomes a problem when our economic inclusivity is actually not inclusive with the case of externalities. Other problems that the private companies have is trickling down good commitments. The commitments coming from the consumer end, when you're selling, you are not being able to sell things that is contending, that has this deforestation inside. But when you are trying to get it down to the ground, then you find some difficulties. Lack of demand for sustainable commodities is also another problem. The palm oil industry in Indonesia is actually having 4 big markets: China, India, EU, and Indonesia itself. Out of the 4, only EU is right now having a very strict regulations for anti-deforestation. If India, China, and Indonesia is getting into that direction as well, then the demand for sustainable commodities will increase. The archaic regulatory framework lacking transparency. The transparency is very important to be able to have a sustainability. That is on the side of the land use exploiting companies. On the other side, we also have the land use conservation and recovery company. It was so good to have by this year the TCVCM, okay, the Task Force for Scaling Voluntary Carbon Market, and that are working on definition for business parameter maturity on carbon and ecosystem services, and also the governance principles. And that is actually a collaboration of stakeholders. So hopefully that kind of platform can work this quicker in terms of getting into the private sector, moving into non-deforestation side. I have an example here as a case. Indonesia Palm Oil Pledge 2014. It was signed by the largest palm oil producers in Indonesia: Wilmar International, Golden Agri Resources, Cargill, Asian Agri, Musimas, and Astra Agro Lestari. Endorsed by the government of Indonesia, facilitated by global organizations like UN, hailed by international NGO, and already implementation organization being set up. But the argument was missing on externalities on human and social capital. It was disbanded by the government of Indonesia in 2016, a tragic end of a PPP. Now the question that I have in my mind, and I'd like to share with you all, why does it fail? And how can we prevent that from happening? IPOP was initiated as a result of a long process related to REDD+ preparation work by government of Indonesia. While focusing on big players and indigenous people interests, the structure of the palm oil industry is put as a homework for the implementation stage because it was so difficult. There are about 6 big players, 1,200 medium players, and 10,000 and more smallholders. So complex that if we want to include at the first place, it will be too long. So we say that homework for the implementation stage. While some of the big players has plenty of acreage under their control, more are operating through big investment in palm oil mills, taking supply from medium and small plantations up to 90 to 95% of the intake of the mills. That is significant. When the pledge of deforestation-free palm oil is about to be implemented, the unprepared plantations, the smaller and medium size, protested to the government, citing discrimination as a reason. I was discriminated. I was not able to sell my palm kernels, and the reason was because I still have deforestation. So the newly established government of Indonesia reacted swiftly, claiming authority on the non-discrimination issue and demanding IPOP to be disbanded. IPOP thus be disbanded. At the same time, the big players remain under pressure from the part of the consuming market. And when it happens, the government of Indonesia sides with the companies for various supply side reasons. So this is a situation why and how IPOP failed. What is lessons the failure of IPOP? The palm oil industry is globally complicated, rich with conflicting interests, and tangled with externalities. The apparent problems related to ecosystem protection is easy to make statement on, but very hard to achieve deliverable results. Attempts like our SPO, Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil, bi- and multilateral compacts, international NGO campaign, and national government commitments abound, but actions will always face on-the-ground realities. The on-the-ground realities present the complexity of politics and governance preparedness. This complexity highlights the basic issue of acknowledgement and mindset change to include natural, human, and social capital externalities in the initiatives to make it a significant headway. So in the case of this predicts, in my opinion, the difficulties faced in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals and climate change challenges, including the net zero attempts. So it was very encouraging to hear all these achievements that we have achieved around the world, but I think that is the low-hanging fruits. And like in durian, the best fruits are not low-hanging. It is high there, and you have to fight to be able to do that. What could have happened in the case of IPOP? Now, philosophically, had externalities been considered in global economy, the challenge will be different, both globally and at national level. On a more practical level, the implementation of IPOP could have been delayed for a few years to be successful. The mills, government, international organization like IDEA, consuming companies, and plantations can work out and agree on grand design and roadmap for zero deforestation palm oil to be implemented in year X, maybe in this case 2030, giving a transition timeline. And during the transition timeline, massive education, productivity enhancing actions, and gradual implementation plan should be operationalized. Like net zero, it will take time, but important and critical to do. And I would like to say at this point that Landscape Partnership Asia having a vision and a mission to be a catalyst of this kind of initiative is very, very much important and necessary and needed on the ground, like in the case of Indonesia, whereby you can catalyze the interest of the corporations, the government, and the global climate change agenda in general. There is no silver bullet for green recovery, ladies and gentlemen. That's my opinion. And focus on forestry on the immediate level. Market for commodities should apply a stricter control on natural resources trade. Like in the case of palm oil, that means India, China, and Indonesia, which is the largest market beside Europe. The international stakeholders should provide more support technocratically and financially to allow for producing ecosystem to shift gear into sustainability by improving productivity, certifications, and information transparency. We need to agree on a workable transition time, maybe on a case-by-case basis, landscape-by-landscape basis, and provide transparent monitoring system. On a conservation and restoration businesses, accelerate clarity on carbon ecosystem services, valuation and governance. The VCM is very important on that. Upscale campaign on inclusive economy, namely the serious inclusion of externalities in economic measures, like what have been spoken by Dr. Pavan Sukhdev, and explore, debate, and establish the new economic theory to include sustainability beside wealth, like Adam Smith, welfare, like Marshall, scarcity and growth, like Samuelson, as key parameters. So we need to put in our economic science the word of satisfying their needs at present and the future. I quote that from Professor A.C. Dash in 2011. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
I got so excited in giving out my question for Mr. Heru Prasetyo. Thank you very much for your presentation, sir. If you will allow me to give my question, may I? I have one for you before we move on to the next speaker.
Go ahead. Sige.
Okay. Oh, you speak Tagalog. All right. So
you studied in
despite despite the overall success of the government of Indonesia in decreasing deforestation in your country, are there other key provinces in Indonesia which still needs focus or which still needs efforts to decrease deforestation? And do you still find it hard to face this challenge in this key provinces in Indonesia, given the overall national success of the country in deforestation?
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, all the success is fragile.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that what we are trying to do is something that needs long-term. I mentioned that actually what the result, the deforestation decrease this year for the last 4 years was a result of plan that was planted in 2012, right? So it takes cross-government. So I believe that what needs to happen is that the continuity of the commitment to the reduction of deforestation and also the emission from that, deforestation both from the mineral soil as well as the peatland and mangrove needs to continuously be prioritized by the government. And we still see that actually part of Indonesia is not as fast in terms of decreasing deforestation as it should. There are new frontiers like Papua, whereby the new road was built and other things, where deforestation is still happening. I am not saying that deforestation is zero now in Indonesia, but the reduction was significant. And we are looking into the future by using what we call the low carbon development initiative that is already being declared by the government, which will need to continue for the next government when we are after the election of 2024. So this is still a big challenge, and the pressure, encouragement, and support will still be needed by Indonesia for the sake of the nation as well as the globe. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, sir. Nevertheless, even if Indonesia still focuses on other key areas or key provinces in the country to decrease deforestation, nevertheless, sir, your country is setting a good motivation, a good inspiration to the global efforts towards our goal in 2050. Thank you very much, sir. Maraming salamat. Thank you, Mr. Heru Prasetyo. And now we shall see you again later to address more questions. Actually, I have collated a few questions for you later on, sir. We will address it to you later on as we move on to our panel discussion. But for the participants, let us know more of your questions and insights from the presentation of Mr. Prasetyo by typing it in the Q&A chat box, and we shall include them in the panel discussion or open forum later on. And we shall now understand the challenges and hurdles in facilitating public-private partnership, opportunities in optimizing the existing resources under international funding mechanism. We shall also discover how can a regional organization like AFoCO, an international community, support to scale up public-private partnership. So joining us today is a senior environmental specialist from the World Bank Group, Mr. Maurice Andress Rawlins.
Hi, good morning, Tina, and good morning to all distinguished guests, including the distinguished panel and also Director Calderon. So my name is Maurice Rawlins, and I'm based in Lao PDR. I actually used to be based in Korea just recently, and so so many of the team are quite familiar to me here. So what I want to share with you in the next few minutes, we don't have a lot of time, is a few different things that that the bank is engaged in, and respond to a few questions that have been raised by the team from AFoCO within the dimension of forest-based solutions that, of course, include work on addressing climate change. So there's a question raised about what are the priorities, what's the support needed and cooperation for carbon neutrality by 2050. I think many of us are really quite familiar with where are the sectoral priorities, and so those are in energy and food systems, in land use change and forestry, manufacturing, transportation, urban infrastructure, etc. And these are priorities because more than 90% of GHG emissions emerged here. And so what we need to see are systematic transformations, fiscal policies, we need plans, incentives, etc. And these come as a sort of a holistic and systems approach, right? No one sector can do it on its own. And so these are some things that the World Bank is looking at in various countries. Accordingly, we are providing support through our investments to countries on climate adaptation, resilience, and mitigation, helping them to draw benefits from the investments that they make with World Bank financing. And we're using the NDC as a platform for doing that. And so we're supporting countries initially in developing their NDCs and now in updating and revising and implementing these, but then also on developing low carbon development plans. All right. Again, you know, which bring together a lot of these different priorities and address them in a sort of a whole of a sort of a cross-sectoral approach, We're also tapping into a multi-donor trust fund called the NDC Support Facility, which is helping to finance grants, technical assistance in various sectors, and also is helping to catalyze and mobilize concessional financing as well. Here in Asia, we have a NDC support facility working in Cambodia, in Laos, in Philippines, in Vietnam. So quite a bit of work that's going on. And then on the area of cooperation, so the World Bank Group is part of the NDC partnership, and this is a coalition of countries, institutions, working to support our climate goals and sustainable development. I checked the list this morning. I didn't see AFoCO there, and so I think it's really quite strategic for AFoCO to think about being part of this this NDC partnership and also contributing as part of this platform to some of these carbon goals. On facilitating private partnerships for climate action, so I think it cannot not be said that the private sector isn't doing a lot already. In fact, we're seeing that the private sector is really ramping up its investment in low carbon development, supporting something like 1 trillion annually. Those of you may know that JP Morgan, for example, pledged $2.5 trillion in support to sustainable development projects. So the private sector is doing quite a lot. And so what the World Bank is doing is really seeing how we can make the investments that are coming through private sector a lot more inclusive and help governments to better tap into some of those investments. And so some of the things that we're focused on are really on creating markets and de-risking investments. We work quite a bit with the IFC, the International Financial Corporation, on developing green bonds, and we've been quite successful in raising 23 billion in projects from private sector that help to lower global carbon emissions. And so this is where I would see opportunities for AFoCO, you know, to step in and provide similar support to countries on creating markets, de-risking investments within the forestry sector and forestry value chains. And this can come through providing technical assistance and analytical support that's helping to identify the risk, but then also using analytics to help identify solutions to risk as well, providing grants for riskier components of investments, but then also facilitating partnerships with important bilaterals like South Korea for concessional deals in some countries. We also do see the need for alignment of PPP frameworks with climate frameworks. Often these are developed by two different parts of government and that have not sort of traditionally spoken to each other. And so what we need to see are more synergies between these frameworks to ensure that climate and disaster risk are well integrated into PPP type investments. On the issue of tackling commodity-driven deforestation, and Mr. Prasetyo spoke quite a bit about this in terms of what the bank is doing. We're working on landscape approaches as a platform for collective action. And so these landscape approaches are bringing together several different players. They're bringing together several different sectors, government, civil society, private sector, to look for these common solutions to tackling commodity-driven deforestation. And so we have some really good examples from within Indonesia. The Biocarbon Fund Initiative for Sustainable Forest Landscapes is helping to tackle deforestation for palm oil, for pulp, wood, rubber, coffee commodities in Laos. We also have the Northern Lao Emissions Reduction Program, which is helping to tackle commodity deforestation in the northern part of the country for agriculture. And so we see these emission reduction payment schemes as being part of the mix of solutions. They are by no means a silver bullet, but they are part of the solution because they do provide strong incentives for maintaining forest cover. Of course, local communities and smallholders are part of this solution for community-driven deforestation, and we see several areas of support that are needed for local communities and smallholders: capacity development and financing to engage in commodity value chains. We see village forestry as being a major area of entry, where we're encouraging villagers to plant commercially viable species, whether they be for non-timber forest product commodities or wood forest product commodities within village lands, and then being part of deals with private sector for wood and non-timber forest product value chains. We see market connectivity, support on negotiation of deals as being quite important. Clear responsibilities of government and other stakeholders in these business and enterprise arrangements. Often, I think a lot of these are quite gray and murky in terms of who is responsible for what, and so this makes the overall investment quite risky. And then on issues of land tenure, this is another thing that that does make the arrangements quite risky, where land tenure isn't clear and where land governance is weak. And so we see this as an important area that organizations like AFoCO could be helping to address, again, through technical assistance, through analytical support, etc., as part of the overall mix of solutions for tackling commodity-driven deforestation. And so on my last slide, I just want to touch on building back better, right? And so the World Bank has been involved quite early on in terms of the response to COVID-19, initially providing what we call the crisis response, right? Ensuring that countries had financing to improve their healthcare systems, later that they had financing to bolster their economies and provide fiscal stimulus, and then moving on to looking at financing for vaccines. And now we're talking about how we take a more long-term approach to the green recovery. And so we have a framework called GRID, as the Green, Resilient and Inclusive Development approach. And so this is recognizing that COVID-19, the pandemic, is coming in the midst of a number of other slow-burning crises that have to do with inequality, poverty, climate change, environmental degradation. And so realizing that the solutions that we put in place to respond to COVID-19 need to be in the context of all of these other solutions as well. And so we're looking at focusing on building resilience and inclusion across all facets of the economy and society, addressing the need for a couple of key things here: sustained, differentiated, targeted, technical and financial support that would enable sufficient and adequate policy response, that would enable strong coordination across bilateral and multilateral organizations, including organizations like AFoCO, and further support and better tap into the private sector. Right, and so this approach, and so you can read more about it through that link that's in the last part of the slide. This approach is one that the World Bank is taking, and so we're using this as a sort of a lens through which we do our investments going forward, looking at focusing on these three dimensions: green, resilient, and inclusive, ensuring that we have the right metrics to ensure that that we can measure the impact of our work along these dimensions, and also defining the sort of the outcomes and goals that we want with respect to this. So let me stop here and say again, thanks so much to AFoCO for inviting the World Bank to be part of this prestigious discussion that's happening in advance of the P4G summit. We really do look forward to continued collaboration going forward, and of course wishing the organizers of this event success as you continue this event and continue on to the P4G summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rawlins. I am collating a few of the comments from our participants, but I will be addressing this to you later as we open the panel discussion or the open forum for the Q&A part of our event. But for now, let me ask you, sir, how can we say that a country is appropriate to be invested in forestry sector?
Okay, tough question. So I think, and the way that the World Bank sees it, you know, the objective of the bank is really to reduce poverty and improve shared prosperity. And so where we see that these issues are challenges is often in the countries where we see that there are major issues with respect to capacity, with respect to natural resources governance, with respect to forest and land issues, etc. And so we are going in really to tackle the issues that often make investing in forests quite challenging. And so the role of the bank, as I mentioned in one of the slides, is really about de-risking investments and really creating the enabling environment for private sector and other organizations to come in to invest in forest. And so our work, our investments are on things like improving land governance, improving tenure systems, setting up systems for accountability, for transparency, etc. And then also strengthening various actors and players within the forest value chains. And so smallholders, communities, governments who are in charge of forest resources, but then also working quite closely with the private sector to help them to sort of better engage and to engage in a more efficient way with countries.
Well, one thing is for sure, before we ask for the efforts of the international community in supporting countries, the first fuel or the primary effort should be coming from the primary stakeholders, from the local governments in each within those countries. But thank you very much, Mr. Maurice, Andress, Rawlins, and we shall see you again later to address more questions. I have a bunch for you. I have a couple of questions for you later on, but I'd like to invite more participants to type in their questions and insights from the presentation of Mr. Rawlins in the Q&A chat box, and we shall include them in the panel discussion or open forum later on. And we shall move on now to our next speaker as we discover how consortium of international organization works. It is my pleasure to introduce the senior scientist and regional coordinator from the Southeast Asia program of the World Agroforestry, my kababayan, Dr. Delia Catacutan.
Thank you very much, Tina. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be in this panel. And also, I guess I'm lucky because I'm the last speaker. And so I will be very quick and simple. A lot has been said already by the previous speaker, and many of the things have been said already. So let me start. Can anyone share my PowerPoint? It's supposed to be controlled. Okay, next slide, please. So I will be focusing on this big question. Are we building back better? Again, we hear a lot of sides, you know, from the previous speakers as well as from the keynote speaker, Dr. Dennis Garrity. Some of us, or most of the speakers, are optimistic, although Mr. Prasetyo said, you know, there's no silver bullet. Everybody agrees to that. So again, so this is a very, very difficult question for all of us. So this question requires or has multiple responses. So what would be a common response? Is it a yes, a no, or a yes, but? You know, so I'd like to pick up from Dr. Garrity's presentation. So, you know, there has been many examples of restoration practices all over the world, and many financing mechanisms being promoted, you know, the coming together of many stakeholders. But still the question is that, are we getting there? So let me start with, next slide, please. So what are the efforts in the international community to build back better? So we all know that there's a plethora of UN conventions out there, agreements, targets, the SDGs, the UN Decade for Ecosystems Restoration, which is going to be launched next month, actually. Many regional and continental agreements, pledges, and commitments. And the coming together, as I said, of climate and development finance, you know, the private sector being largely awakened recently, making their commitments to a green, you know, pathway. So, okay, next slide, please. Now, there are also many efforts to strengthen climate action. And you can see these things are not really new, you know, these are common buzzwords that we hear almost every day in, you know, in the climate, environment, and forestry sector. Multi-stakeholder cooperation, you know, so everybody is promoting this one, but still the problem of institutional silos exist. So what do we do about this? Even if we say we will collaborate, but there is still this, you know, barriers between sectors. I think, speaking of my own country, the Philippines, and many countries all over the world. Now, multi-sectoral platforms, we see a lot of, we see an emergence of multi-sectoral platforms, the newest one being Landscape Partnership in Asia, Landscape Partnership Asia. And they are great. We needed them because you cannot just work on, you know, every single organization or individuals across the world. But we need those multi-sectoral platforms to be the ones that are honest, credible, and with long-term and big ambitions and commitments. We also hear the word nesting, you know, national targets being, you know, being cascaded to the local level, and local actions adding up to national actions. So, you know, there's an argument, you know, where you start, from the bottom up or from the top. So all of these are really not new, but I think these are areas that we are already starting to dig in, but still needs a lot of effort. Next slide, please. So on private-public partnership and investments, I'm very happy to hear from our colleague from the World Bank, and I'm gonna highlight on this aspect, development finance. Yes, there's a plethora of development finance also available, but please, our plea is to make the rules and procedures and requirements fairly simple. We all know, I mean, of course, it's not easy to develop a project, but we see also that there are projects that are being developed for 4 to 5 years, or even more than that, before it gets implemented on the ground. So really, this development financing mechanisms has to consider the time elapsed, you know, the time frame of developing projects to implementation. The business sector, there is a need for setting carbon, not just offsetting, you know. So that's not just washing off your, you know, washing off the dirt in your hands, but really doing it inside your own household. So government needs to promote pro-restoration policies. For example, a policy on natural capital accounting and budgeting. I think that there are many governments that are into this, but still the natural capital accounting and budgeting part is, needs a lot of attention. Also, boundary organizations, there's also a lot of organizations out there transcending their roles to being, for example, in research, to linking science and action, policy actions. So an example is AFoCO. I see AFoCO as a boundary organization that can broker trust and tree-based co-investments, bringing business development and governments together. And this was also highlighted by Mr. Maurice. Next slide, please. On number 3, building on lessons learned. Again, as we heard from Dr. Dennis Garrity, there's a lot of experiences out there. Farmer managed natural regeneration, assisted natural, all those exciting and not really new restoration approaches. But many of our countries lacked credible baselines. So this is an area where our national governments need help. They are missing enormous opportunities by failing to recognize and to tap on the works of many unsung heroes and small victories within their countries. So baselines are very important in order for us to effectively plan and monitor actions and successes, especially to recalibrate actions. Next slide, please. On efforts to tackle community-driven deforestation. So I see AFoCO has a role to facilitate dialogues with large multinational companies to promote responsible land-based investments. VGGT, for example, this is the voluntary guidelines on governance and tenure. So this may be a space that is not currently being entered to by AFoCO, but I see that being an intergovernmental organization, AFoCO will have, great, influence in mediating and facilitating dialogues. Collectively addressing drivers. This is also very important. In the forestry sector, we tend to protect our turf, our forest, and forget to address the drivers of deforestation. So it is calling for the forestry sector to really go beyond forestry and to look at those pressing drivers on deforestation. So we can help promote agroforestry, trees outside forest, and regenerative practices, nature-based solutions, and also policy incentives. There's also a need for real-time monitoring, the use of phone applications, citizen science, and crowdsourcing. Most importantly, local communities need support to build capacity to manage mixed farming systems. This is very important, because in the coming years and in the next decades or next century, we may not need a lot of land to produce food for 7 billion or more people in the planet. What we really need is to use our resources efficiently and effectively. So we should aim to increase productivity on limited lands, trying to increase land equivalent ratio in production systems, so that we can address deforestation. So we don't need to convert forest lands, but use existing lands, our limited lands, to the best of its ability. Finally, last slide, please. On the road to green recovery. So I am focusing suggestions or insights for AFoCO. Again, AFoCO can facilitate technology transfer and finance. Examples are the forest fire management and renewable energy technologies championed by South Korea to Southeast Asian countries. Also carbon finance by South Korean companies. And I would like to also add to what Maurice has mentioned, analytics, evidence-based advice to governments about policies conducive to climate actions and carbon neutral pathways. So I guess that's the end of my presentation. So in closing, I would just like to say that on the road to green recovery, there is never a comfortable road or pathway to green recovery. it is uncomfortable. It is a difficult road to green recovery. What we really need is to come out from our comfort zone and work together, break those institutional silos, and we have to be true, finance, research, local organizations, governments, true to the word of multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder cooperation, because we all say this is not this is not a challenge. The climate crisis is not a challenge that any single organization, any single person or government can achieve or can address single-handedly. So thank you so much, and have a good discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Delia Catacutan. I have a few questions for you, but let me open the Q&A portion of our event, our open forum. May I ask Mr. Heru, Prasetyo, and Mr. Maurice Andress Rawlins, together with Dr. Delia Catacutan, to be accessible for our participants. I have the questions from the floor. I'll give this first to Ms. Delia. Dr. Delia, could you cite an example on how to make rules and procedures simpler on the finance development? And what do you think are the current barriers in terms of finance development or resource mobilization?
Thank you, Tina. Such a very difficult question, especially that I think there are many donors, colleagues from the financing sector here. Well, I know that the financing rules has to be transparent, has to adhere to certain principles, so many principles and guidelines, and of course they are important, and to maintain, to sustain those financing mechanisms. But I think that the time, the procedures, for example, let me not mention a funding mechanism, but from the time of project identification to preparation of your concept note to full project design to approvals, that might take 4 years. And, before it gets implemented on the ground, you have internal country procedures that might take 1 to 2 years. So you will find projects commonly, that can be implemented, 6 years after or 5 years after. So you can be lucky if you have, 2 years, 3 years of project development. So, I don't have a great answer to that, but there must be a way of simplifying the procedures, so, and if of course, trust is very important here. Track record of whom you are giving the money out is very important. So there are certain criteria that one should, a recipient should adhere to. But, all those very, very voluminous requirements really is killing the whole process. So if that can be shortened, the paperwork, the back and forth, it will make a big difference in really bringing restoration benefits on the ground. So I'm sorry if I could not really specify, which of the specific procedures should be shortened. But I think that is a general plea, to our financing sector to just please make it more efficient. Thank you.
Well, I got a very important message from your closing after your presentation, or before you end your presentation a while ago. You highlighted that this is not going to be easy for anyone. It will entail a lot of effort from the local and international bodies for this to happen. So I think, yes, I can agree with you that there's no procedure simpler than what we are doing right now to mobilize our plans. Okay, so for Mr. Heru, I have a question for you from the point of view coming from the private sector, to highlight once again what are the ways or how we can approach the balance between the national and global needs for emission.
The national and global needs for emission should be aligned.
Mm-hmm.
So if the national reduce, the global should be impacted the same way. Now, if the global wants more than what the national is willing to give, global needs to put pressure on the national to think again and do more. But I have another perspective that is a little bit concerning me, okay? In terms of the new technology that's now being in and the intent to have no one left behind. When you're talking about multi-stakeholder collaborations, then you're talking about fintech put into the equation. Okay, the finance technology put into the equations, whereby the fintech itself will still have some questions in terms of governance. So addressing what Dr. Delia mentioned about the process of long and winding to get the project coming from multilateral funder, I think the funding that comes from the public and from the private sector needs to be promoted. But if that is to be promoted, then the process that gets speed may actually needs to be governed better. All right, you know, the up and down of the Bitcoin and all those things is beyond our thinking. But in terms of fintech, that is actually providing the tension between the banking sector as well as the financial sector that is not governed by the banking regulations. So the position, the money that is going to be available is going to be more, but channel can be more, but the governance of those things are still weak. So I think AFoCO can actually do a group that is trying to do what are the safeguards to have the money that is coming from crowdsourcing, helping reduce deforestation, and going to the green, building back better.
Got that, Mr. Heru Prasetyo. Thank you very much for that answer. Now, I have a couple of questions, Mr. Maurice. I think this can be associated also to the question thrown earlier to Dr. Delia. This time, from the perspective of an international financial mechanism, how far can we go when we say simplifying the finance development?
Thank you so much, Dr. Delia. You know, when you said shorten, make it faster, I smiled because being within the organization itself, I do feel that that we can move a little faster, you know. But let me share a little bit in terms of what I think can be done. First of all, I think we need to, within a lot of these countries where we work or where we want to do work on restoration, I think we need to be thinking about a more of a longer term agenda, sort of a programmatic approach, as opposed to these project by project type approaches. And the reason why I'm saying this, you know, is because in countries where we've been able to sort of build on previous projects, we are able to move faster with respect to project preparation and even have more effective implementation. This is because we have built up a sufficient analytical data and information base upon which to develop new projects. We've also enhanced the capacity of certain government agencies to be able to effectively manage projects. And so when we're talking about managing sizable financing, there's a lot that goes into it, right? And so when we see that over time capacities have been built up, we've seen that that projects have been able to go faster. One area where, particularly within the forest and landscape sector, it gets a little bit tricky is on the environmental and social safeguards, right? Because we're working within a system, we're working within a sector that's spatially very large. It's often very complex. You have a number of different sort of private and other, a lot of private interest, a lot of governance arrangements, a lot of relationships and situations that are typically undocumented, right? And so when you talk about doing an investment within a forest landscape, you have to look really quite closely at, okay, what is going to be the impact of these investments, not only in terms of the environmental, which seems to be the obvious thing with respect to the GHG emissions and all this sort of thing, but quite importantly, the social, right? You have a lot of forest communities who for whatever reasons, are undocumented within landscapes, but they do hold certain rights. They've been there for certain amount of time. They have livelihoods that are closely tied to the landscape. And so when we bring in an investment, we need to look at all of these things in detail to ensure that the investment that's coming in is really helping to improve the livelihoods of these people. If they are in fact displaced, we need to ensure that there are alternative livelihoods that could be available. So building up sort of the database of the understanding of a particular place is really quite important. You know, in countries where we've had a fairly long engagement in forestry, like in Indonesia and like in Laos, we find that we've been able to, over time, move a bit faster because we understand the issues a bit more. We understand the landscape. The government is better capacitated, both at the central level and the local level. And so all of these things sort of come into the mix of things, you know. And so going back to your sort of primary question about what could we do better, I think it's about a collaboration among not only the MDBs, but then also the bilateral organizations, the civil society, again, to define this longer term agenda, to define this programmatic approach, and to be clear on what everyone is bringing to the mix, right? Where you have organizations that are bringing sort of large finance like the MDBs, it would be useful to understand how other organizations that are more sort of technical and research oriented are bringing the data and information that can underpin some of these investments. So that's what I would say in response to that question. But again, you know, it's not a it's not an easy game. It's a really complicated sector, very different, I think, from other sectors like infrastructure and stuff like that. And so it does require quite a lot of work to really develop the strong deals. Let me stop there. Back to you.
Yes, I have a more specific question for you, though, coming again from one of our participants. A current company called SK Forest has special concern for Lao PDR as their potential REDD+ project destination. Do you believe, sir, that Lao PDR is an appropriate country to invest in forest sector? And what might be the merits and obstacles of Lao PDR in terms of REDD+ project sites in the near future? That's quite specific.
Thanks. So I think we can take the discussion offline, but let me highlight a few points. So yes, I think Laos is quite appropriate. And so let's start from a sort of a political willingness. The government of Lao PDR has expressed the need for a green growth approach. Within its new socioeconomic development plan, green growth appears several times, circular economy appears. And so the government really does see this sort of transformation of natural capital as being really quite important for its development. And so it's building up the capacity of its Department of Forestry within its Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry to be able to engage in these sorts of emission reduction payment schemes. In fact, the government signed an emission reduction payment scheme with the World Bank last December for a scheme that's worth about $42 million in the northern part of Laos in 6 provinces. And so as part of that, we are working on strengthening the capacity of the Department of Forestry to be able to effectively sort of use and manage and effectively distribute these resources. And so I would say to SK Forest, now is the right time to think about coming into Laos. The country has a lot of forest resources, significant significant areas. It also has sort of significant challenges with respect to its overall macroeconomic situation, but then also in terms of its poverty situation and investments like these sorts of emission reduction payment schemes really do a lot, I think, for providing finance and incentives for conserving forest resources, but then also providing opportunities for livelihood developments. I would say in terms of the obstacles are what we typically see in several different countries, ensuring the accountability of the entire system when payments are made for emission reductions, ensuring that these payments are actually being matched against actual emission reductions. And so having an appropriate monitoring, reporting, and verification system is really quite important. And then ensuring that, that there is a robust benefit sharing plan to ensure that financing that's coming in through the emission reduction payment scheme is going to the right stakeholders and beneficiaries of that. So again, I don't think the challenges are insurmountable. They do require quite a bit of technical assistance and capacity development as well. Let me stop there, Tina.
Thank you very much, sir. I have still a lot of questions from our participants, but we are running out of time. So thank you very much to our dear speakers today for giving us guidance in this forum. And for the closing, may I ask Mr. Ricardo Calderon to join us and to open your camera for us to immortalize this moment and to have a virtual photo with Dr. Dennis Garrity as well, Mr. Heru Prasetyo, Mr. Maurice Andress Rawlins, and Dr. Delia Catacutan. May we have a virtual photo opportunity with you guys. Thank you so much for guiding us through. Okay, there you have it. Okay, let me count. 3, 2, 1. And one more. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much, dear speakers, for your time and effort in sharing so much knowledge from your respective sectors to highlight the roles of forest in bringing net zero emission ambition. We are concluding our open forum with an awareness of the many opportunities we can pursue together for a greater impact of forest-based solutions across the globe. And as we come to a close, may I call on once again Mr. Ricardo Calderon to integrate today's presentation and to give the closing remarks.
Thank you, Tina, for the very clear and lively discussion and excellently moderating this AFoCO event. Distinguished colleagues, partners, our distinguished panelists, Dr. Dennis Garrity, Ms. Mira, Mr. Heru Prasetyo, Dr. Delia Catacutan, and of course, Mr. Maurice Rawlins. Thank you very much for the great input. Of course, our LPA founding members, Robert, Chris, I extend great appreciation for your support and partnership. Last but not the least, all the 103 participants tuning in, and thank you very much. Picking up from what Tina's wrap up, let me take note of the few points from Mr. Dennis Garrity, the chair of the Global EverGreening Alliance, highlighted the opportunity to restore the tree cover on 575 million hectares of degraded forest lands to capture an additional 8.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year. For our distinguished panelists, Ms. Mira, the Director General of the Forest Policy Bureau of the Korea Forest Service, emphasized the need to a balanced approach of Republic of Korea. We grow forests, we grow hope for the future, for greenhouse gas emission absorption, water purification, biodiversity, air quality, wood and biomass, and forest welfare for forest communities. Mr. Heru Prasetyo of Indonesia Business Link Board of Patron emphasized that there is no silver bullet for green recovery, particularly on conservation and restoration businesses, the need for clarity on carbon and ecosystem services and valuation, including governance, balanced national and global needs for emission reduction credits, the need to incorporate externalities on nature, human and social capital versus revenue in order to ensure sustainability. From Mr. Maurice Andress Rawlins from World Bank, a senior environmentalist of World Bank, promoting inclusive recovery from COVID-19 needs for a sustained, differentiated, and targeted financial and technical support for an adequate policy response, strong coordination across bilateral and multilateral organizations, including the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, and further support to the private sector. Of course, Dr. Delia Catacutan, Senior Scientist and Regional Coordinator of Southeast Asia Program of the World Agroforestry CIFOR-ICRAF, to enhance private-public partnership and investments. Development finance, rules, procedures, and requirements has to be fairly simplified, with government policies pro-restoration, with a well-defined natural accounting policy and sustained fiscal investments. This was ably explained also further by Mr. Rawlins of World Bank. Again, thank you, Tina. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Calderon and AFoCO. Congratulations on this event. Let me just read a few of the comments of our participants as they show their participation to you guys, or their appreciation to you guys as we close our event. From Byung-Ki An, he said, I really thank for the AFoCO Secretariat's special effort providing this meaningful side event in the margin of the P4G Summit Green Week. And we also have a comment from one of our participants beyond Korea, and his comment says, in June 2019, the government of Guyana its low carbon development strategy, or LCDS, which is also parallel to the mission of AFoCO and international partners across the globe. Thank you so much, friends, for participating and for sending in your comments and your questions, and we commit to address your unanswered questions after this event via email. We are just running out of time, but we are so productive this morning, and thank you. Coming from the Philippines, I am very thankful to be moderating this event with you guys, and I hope that we will continue our mission towards 2050. Congratulations, Mr. Calderon, and to the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization for the pre-summit of P4G. I am Nguyen, spreading the mission of being responsible stewards of our natural resources, of our dear Earth, having conscious obligation to achieve the green path to building back together. This has been Tina Marasigan from the Philippines. Guys, enjoy the rest of your day.